My name is Ali MacFarlane. I'm the founder of Sugar Rush Creative. We're a digital agency that specialises in app development software, and we've got 2 studios spread across London and Belfast. Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, it has to do with the concept. Concept's key, and how that concept's actually structured as well. So it has to benefit the user, it has to benefit the environment for that user, and therefore a simple concept may be quite complex when you start to drill down on it. So the layers of process is, I mean, quite straightforward. It's the user experience, so the UX research, and how sort of user flow is compiled, how the wireframing is sketched out, and then we move to sort of prototyping. So using the workflow, and this is probably the most important part, is how the user actually moves through the app itself. So at every point you need to understand where the triggers are, where the drop-offs are. So thinking about maybe more complex apps, there could be sign-in, there could be onboarding, there could be registration, payments as well. So there's a lot to think about, and I think for that process is to be quite pragmatic and quite structured as well. So moving on from that is probably the fun part. The fancy part is putting together a lot of visuals, wrapping the designs around the using the images and text, and just compiling the real front end stuff. So we would definitely create every page and not leave any screen untouched. That gives a sense for structure in the studio, but ultimately for the client, because they'll understand exactly where things are placed. Then we move to code all the front end designs, and start developing. I think that's probably the most important thing is actually develop it. Testing is the final stage. It's probably, I think, well, it definitely is the most important stage, just right up there with development. There's a lot of things that can crop up once everything is built. That could be something to do with the environment, the connectivity. Usually we would make sure all the features and functions are working before any client sees it, but the battery power, all of these things that you probably wouldn't consider that may have an adverse effect on the usability. And then finally deployment, making sure it actually gets past the stores, so uploading to the app stores in terms of iOS and Android, just making sure that that runs smoothly. Firstly, you have to establish what app is best suited for the client and their users. So ultimately, there's 2 areas: the enterprise apps and the public facing apps and the consumer apps. So research what the problems and the issues are that they're having, and that obviously will resolve the functionalities that can come from an app construction. User testing before that, questionnaires, interviews, really just to get a complete grip of what the project is going to entail. So that really ties in with a lot of the user flows beforehand, a lot of the wireframing, just really getting to grips with the whole infrastructure. Because once you have that infrastructure down, it would ultimately become part of that research, as well as the UI, as well as the development. So that's really, in a sense, what it'll entail. Well, you ultimately would make sure that the user feels that they can operate the app properly. So any app that's being developed is going to benefit a process, is going to benefit communication, buying a product quicker, quicker processes, whatever the case may be. But ultimately, building up that trust is to make sure that the app is easy to use, easy to operate. If any user is struggling to get to the next step, you've lost them. And there's different ways that you can do that in terms of maybe education. If you have a complex app, sometimes that is difficult to be simplistic about things. You know, and I said earlier that it's certainly to create maybe tutorials and try to educate the user, all of which builds trust and retains users, and ultimately the app needs to work without any errors. So depending on the app, design needs to be simplistic. We all know about that. I suppose the black art is making front end designs simplistic without making it look sparse and uninspiring. I think whenever you're faced with very complex structure, you just need to be very cute and smart about how things are placed. Comes back to the user flow, comes back to the wireframing, making sure that there's a free flowing step by step for the user, and that call to action towards the end is something that should be effortless. So minimalist, you know, there's a fine line between designing next to nothing. So as long as it has functionality, as long as it is sympathetic to the brand guidelines or sympathetic to the actual design layout, then I have no problem with it. So minimalist could equal simplistic. So with that, there's no issues at all. The advice is thinking about the marketing strategy. You know, there's a best practice to have marketing plan laid out before, but ultimately marketing plan strategy for after the app is launched. So it's thinking about the how to reach the masses. What does that marketing plan look like? Understand that there will be a fairly intense effort into tracking those users, understanding user behavior. You know, for our clients, and certainly for anyone that's was thinking about developing an app, is you can't just launch it and suddenly it's there and it's a massive success. It's probably more work involved in getting a successful app off the ground than actually developing it. So definitely need to be aware of tracking the app, tracking the users, tracking the events actually on the app as well. So but feeding into your marketing. So you want to get that data back. You want to understand, you know, the user flow that we had at the start. Is that relevant now? Is there part of that we need to scale back because these users are using it in a slightly different way? So it's definitely knowing at every click, at every button, at every page, at every turn, that you know who's on your app and who's using it, because then that will ultimately feed back into crafting a better app for version 1, version 2, version 3. Integrations, that's another potential. API integrations as well. Ultimately they should have been really drafted out at the start, but a lot of these apps now are integrating into various platforms, and that really is something that's taken off quite massively. Well equipped to that's all I have to say.